Hey, this is Rob Anspach, and welcome to another edition of eHeroes. Today's eHero is Kelly Alexander, and I brought Kelly on board because, right now, all these businesses, in fact, American businesses, are paying way too much in taxes. And so Kelly is, I think, one of the foremost experts on how to help you reduce that tax that you pay. So welcome, Kelly, and I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
So what got you into this crusade of helping people save on their taxes?
Well, I think actually it started prior to understanding what I came to learn about the tax system. My whole life, I've been drawn to alternative approaches to things. I found that some of the common, normal explanations just weren't quite satisfying for me. When I was 19, I was told that I had an incurable disease and that, I'd be plagued with it the rest of my life, off and on, blah, blah, blah. And I started studying some healing literature and I cured myself.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a severe case of the genital herpes. Horrible, horrible, horrible. And got through the episode. I really have, to this day, have no idea how I contracted it. And about 6 months later, I felt the early signs of a reoccurrence. And like I said, I was studying some healing metaphysical literature, and I just started talking to the disease. And I says, "You get out of this body right now. You are not welcome here. You have no purpose here." I did that for about 48 hours straight, just walking through my life, doing whatever I was doing. And all of those initial symptoms of an outbreak melted away. I have never had a fear of the disease coming back. I have never had an outbreak. I've never passed it on to anyone else, nothing. And so that experience showed me that there is so much power that we have that is untapped, unexpressed anywhere in our society, or not anywhere. There's a few little places where it is. And that just, it came so early in my life that it it shaped how I approach the world and solutions and challenges and what do you do. So, from there, I explored all kinds of different faith and religious traditions and, business. And I had a career in the fashion design world in Los Angeles for 25 years. And then I wanted to invest in real estate and the stock market. And that's where I started learning about the Federal Reserve and how it works. And there's just little things coming up in little signals that, I need to dig deep into that. And that was the genesis of my uncovering what I did with the taxation. The Federal Reserve System came into being in 1913. It basically was delegated by our Congress the power to issue and regulate our monetary policy and currency and set interest rates and those types of things. And since 1913, it has become a very entrenched system that people really don't question that much, although there's more awakening now than, say, a decade ago. And it is the key to the remedy that I uncovered. The Federal Reserve is the reason that the IRS exists. IRS is the collection arm for the Federal Reserve. So the way it works is, let's say our Congress wants to pass an infrastructure spending program for $15 billion. They create a bond, which is essentially an IOU, that says, we're good for 15 billion. And then they give that to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve holds that as collateral. and then credits the US Treasury checking account with $15 billion. Okay, so now Congress can proceed with its spending program. Now, when the Congress does that, it assumes an obligation that 15 billion must be paid back. And because of the way the Federal Reserve operates, it must be paid back with interest. So that's the reason that we have a national debt. It's not the only, but it's the primary reason. And it's the reason why our national debt is, well, it's not the only reason, but it's part of the reason it's so massive right now in relative terms. I think it's 24 trillion. You know, I'm not sure with all these recent things that have been passed, but it's very high. So when the Federal Reserve credits the US Treasury checking account for $15 billion, there's no credit for the interest that is also due to be paid back. So this causes a never-ending cycle of the Congress requesting more money, and this catch-22 of they owe that money plus interest, and then they owe that extra next round of money plus interest. And because the interest is never created, this is what leads to a lot of either bankruptcies, foreclosures, defaults, because mathematically there is not enough money in the system for the US government to meet its obligation. All of the money that the IRS collects through taxation goes to service the debt, the national debt, the interest on the national debt. So many times we hear, oh, your tax dollars at work, you know, building a road or a bridge or whatever it happens to be. And in literal terms, it's not accurate. It's paying the interest. It's just keeping up, you know, our neck above water with that national debt. Before the Federal Reserve, our Congress issued the money directly. There was no middleman Federal Reserve. There was no interest to be paid back. There was no principal to be paid back. It was a reflection of the economic activity of the people. And money supply grows in part because more people and more ingenuity and more creativity and more, you know, writers, thinkers, all those things expand our economy. And that's the way that our founding fathers set up the country to function. That's what they knew from their own life history in Britain and in Europe, that a central banking system, which is the equivalent of our Federal Reserve, is a detriment to any economy and any people. It just is. So that understanding that most people don't have a clue of, and they're not going to learn it in school or university or the media or the financial services industry, they're just not going to be exposed to that awareness.
Right.
And that's what I do.
And what they do teach you in high school, college, you know, for accounting, for businesses and for individuals is the same old stuff. It doesn't cover any alternatives. It doesn't cover, you know, this is what we want you to do to save money. All we want you to do is continue to pay the tax.
Right. Right. And, you know, as time has gone on, you know, these powers that be have more and more influence with lobbyists and legislation, and it just keeps going more and more down the path of what I see as hurting the masses in a direction that benefits the lawmakers.
Yeah, you know, and for small businesses like me, you know, I was a sole proprietor for a long, long time. Now we're an LLC to try to help cut back on taxes, and then we created, you know, our own what was it called, some 401k for entrepreneurs,
right?
And it's great. The problem is I'm still paying taxes.
Yeah, those things can help, they come with strings attached. You have, a lot of limitations, and, when you can start withdrawing 401k without a penalty, and, all the parameters. Um, and so I'm here to share with your audience, there's another door to walk through. It's legal, it's safe, it's unknown primarily, although thousands of people have discovered it and are using it. And it's become my life calling to handhold people through that new path.
And you say legal, but I mean, is it something that the IRS is going to finally knock on your door and say, hey, look, what are you doing?
Oh, that's a great point. So I started this process for myself and my own taxes back in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, I'm going to try this out, see how it goes. And went well the first year. My husband says, I'm not going to have any part of it. You're on your own. And he came on board the following year. No problem. Everything went swimmingly, actually. And there came a time when I said to myself, or I actually started praying that the IRS would challenge me so that I could go through that process. And I got my wish granted this last June. Actually, this last year twice. In June, I received a frivolous filing notice for my 2018 tax return. And in November, I received a frivolous filing notice for my 2017 tax return. Different IRS locations, different agents. And to be fair, most IRS agents are not aware of this. Only until you get until the upper rungs of IRS management are you apprised of this avenue. And I don't fault them. They're doing their job. They look at a tax return such as the one I submitted, and on the face it looks, this has to be nuts.
Right.
So I worked with a gentleman who has also been doing this method for many, many years, and he has developed a proprietary method for responding to IRS, and I followed his system. He's really the expert on that piece, and so I defer to him and refer people to him if that's ever to happen. And since then, IRS has stayed and remained entirely silent. I have not received any other letters, no phone calls, no knocks on the door. I have an account with IRS and I've checked it, and it says that I have a zero outstanding balance for not only those 2 years that they questioned, but every year that I have done this since 2014. Wow. So that is awesome reassurance for anyone that might consider going down this road.
So how does it work? Are you allowed to reveal that?
Yes, yes, I can. It's actually an elegantly simple process. So it's, unless you document and inform otherwise, it is presumed that you are conducting your financial commercial life with Federal Reserve notes. That's the money that the Federal Reserve issues. What people have no idea of is that we are not compelled to use the Federal Reserve's money. Even though it is the dominant currency, it is legal tender, it's the default, it's what we carry around in our wallets. The U.S. Congress still has its ability to issue its own currency. That is known in an umbrella term as lawful money. Doesn't mean Federal Reserve notes are not lawful. Of course, they're lawful. But it's a certain kind of lawful money that distinguishes it from Federal Reserve money. And in today's era, it's called United States notes.
Oh, wasn't the currency before Federal Reserve, weren't they called U.S. notes?
Yes, they were. They've gone by different names. up until the Civil War, our currency was strictly gold and silver coins. There
Mhm.
was no paper money. And then Lincoln started issuing greenbacks, which were lawful money. So yeah, there have been morphs and different versions of the congressional money, but yes. And United States notes are spoken of in Title 31 of the United States Code at subsection 5115. And it just explains, yes, they exist, and this is how they're issued, and this is how many are in circulation, and they are not a reserve currency,
Hmm.
which means, as with Federal Reserve notes, there is this whole system called fractional reserve lending.
Mhm.
So, as an example, someone goes with their paycheck to their bank and deposits it. The banks, who are all connected to the Federal Reserve System, they're required under reserve lending practices to hold 10% in reserve. And then they are allowed to generate an additional 90% of that deposit to make available as loans for consumer loans, mortgages, credit cards, business loans, that type of thing. Now, when I say generate an additional 90%, I mean the 10% that gets held as reserve and the 90% that's deposited. That first 90% is what banks invest and move around between themselves for their own business models. The second 90% is the part that is generated over and above both of those categories, reserves and what it's labeled excess reserves. So this is one of the ways that our money supply is exponentially expanded. So again, it's a very creative uh, manufacturing system. I don't even know what else to call it. You know, as citizens, we're not allowed to counterfeit, but you could possibly label that as counterfeiting in its own, you know, in its own way. So back to your original question. The trick is to document that you are no longer using the Federal Reserve notes. And that is accomplished through a very simple way of endorsing the back of your paycheck. You write on the back, lawful money is redeemed, or I'm sorry, yeah, is redeemed or demanded pursuant to Title 12, subsection 411.
Wow.
Title 12 in the United States Code addresses the banking laws. And Title 12, 411 says that Federal Reserve notes shall be redeemed upon demand at the U.S. Treasury or at any Federal Reserve notes for lawful money, which is the other species of money that is available to us. So we just cite that code. We make a copy of our check, front and back, and then we deposit it into the bank, and then the bank treats it differently than Federal Reserve money. They cannot fractionally lend against it and do that, you know, quasi counterfeiting process. And so that helps keep our national debt lower. It causes our monetary policy to be more honest. And it is the turning point to making your new income exempt from the income tax. Because United States notes, because they have no obligation on the government, they don't need to be paid back with interest, they are exempt from taxation, income taxation specifically, both federal and state income tax.
Wow. So as an LLC, I pay myself a dividend every single month,
Mm-hmm.
and then or a distribution check, and I take it to the bank. I never sign it. I just deposit it. So going forward, I would have to sign it with that
Yeah.
verbiage, and when I go to do my taxes, anything that I've distributed to myself via check is non-taxable now.
Correct. Yes,
Wow.
as long as we document it, which is simple enough. I mean, there's changes, but they're not difficult things. It's just a little bit of a new habit to adapt to in how we do our banking, because the key moment is when new money enters our bank account.
Okay.
That's the key.
So I guess that would also affect Social Security down the road when I try to collect, since I no longer am paying into it because I'm not paying taxes.
Okay, so let me clarify that. This is for federal income tax only.
Okay.
You will, as a business owner or an employee of a company, you will still have withholdings for Social Security, Medicare, and whatever other elective things that come
Okay.
from your pay. So just, yes, it's income tax strictly, but
Okay.
that's the biggest chunk.
Yeah. I mean, if I can reduce the amount of money that I'm paying to the government, then it frees up a lot of money down the road.
Right. And so to build on that, not only is this a clear benefit for us as individuals, when we do this, as an example, let's say over the course of a year, someone redeems or demands lawful money and their income was $100,000 for that year.
Mm-hmm.
This means that the Federal Reserve must surrender an equivalent amount of those bonds that it is holding as collateral, so in this case, $100,000, back to the U.S. Treasury, because that money is no longer on the national debt ledger. It doesn't have to be paid back. So as citizens, this is so empowering, because I don't know if our Congress is ever going to have the spine to abolish the Federal Reserve, but we don't have to wait on our Congress. We as individuals can do it one by one and take back the power that has been taken from us, mostly without our full knowledge or consent.
It just requires a little bit more paperwork than we're used to doing.
It does, however, it vastly simplifies the tax return, because now you're in a position where you're no longer looking for every deduction that's allowed in the tax code.
Mm-hmm.
Say if you're a real estate investor and you want to do a 1031 exchange, well, that's a lot more paperwork to apply and qualify for and jump through those hoops and meet the deadlines and so forth to receive that tax benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a change, absolutely. And this is not for everyone, certainly, but for those that are ready and willing to embrace something that has been in the law book since 1933, and this is not brand new. This has been in place really since our country went through the Depression, when FDR was in office. The country was actually going through a form of a bankruptcy, and that's why he called the bankers' holiday, put out that executive order to have the citizens turn in their gold certificates, their bullion, in exchange for Federal Reserve notes. Up until 1933, Federal Reserve notes were easily exchangeable back and forth between paper or gold.
Mm-hmm.
In 1933, that stopped. And one of the congressmen at that time recognized that if we demand that the citizens give up their gold, and we now give them paper money that's no longer exchangeable for gold, that is an unequitable exchange. And if we do this, we're committing theft against the people and treason. And when he spoke that, it was recognized in the committees, yeah, he's right. We need to do something about this. And that is the genesis of Title 12, subsection 411.
Wow. Yeah.
Federal
And
Reserve notes shall be redeemed for lawful money was the way out and the way for the Congress to cover themselves.
I think it simplifies the tax code so much easier. Well, not the tax code by itself, but the tax that you have to fill out at the end of the year. Because honestly, I've had to get programs upon programs because I can't remember 80,000 pages of tax code.
Right, right. It's over 83,000 pages now.
Yeah,
It's massive. It's unwieldy.
yeah,
And any one account, even the top flight CPA, is not going to master all those 83,000 pages. They're going to specialize in a segment, and they will develop a business based on people that fall into the segments that they're a specialist in.
yeah,
And CPAs, yeah, they're very smart, educated people. By and large, they do a good job of keeping people out of trouble. They're trained in the tax code, and they're very trained about compliance. And so they're not trained in banking law. And so they're not aware of this. And I just want people to know, if you're working with a CPA and you run to them and say, hey, what about this? Most of the time they're going to be down on it because it's outside their area of expertise.
right.
So,
And tax accountants, who just do taxes constantly all year round, may not understand this at all either. So
right.
going with
Again,
someone who understands this is the best bet.
right, right. Yeah, tax accountants, tax attorneys, these people, again, they're very skilled people in the tax code itself.
So if the audience, is curious and they want, your help,
Okay.
how do they go get it? Do they do they email you? Do they call you?
The best way is to email me at info@mytaxremedy.com.
Gee, that's the simplest way.
It's pretty simple. Yeah.
And what do they have to expect? I mean, what's the process after that?
So I have a coaching program, and I guide people, with as much hand holding as they require. It takes some knowledge and understanding. I meet with people privately, primarily one-on-one, online, just like you and I are doing now, for those that are not local to me. I'm located in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I have something called a quick start blueprint that shows them how to document their deposits of their income. Because, okay, so in today's era, so many people are not using checks nearly as much as previously. There's a lot of direct deposit and ACH transfers and moving money around with wire transfers. So there's ways to manage all of that. And so I teach them that. And then I have my coaching program takes them through the entire process, with working with them very closely on preparing their tax return. It's not hard, but again, it's different. And that's where the rubber meets the road, is the tax return, because that's where you're making your claim with IRS.
Right, right.
So that's it.
So there you go, folks. If you want Kelly to help you, please, email her at info@mytaxremedy.com, and, take a chance, because if it's going to save you some money, maybe it's worth taking a look at. So thank everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.